Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to the Seth Joyner Show on Wednesday today rather than our normal day, Tuesday. I was flying, coming back off of another vacation. Yes, another golf vacation. I got to get it in because, once the season starts, all the fun ends because, football is where it's at. Football is my life. I want to start off today by offering up my thoughts and prayers with the Greg Knapp family. If you guys don't know Greg Knapp, was the quarterback coach for the New York Jets, and he was involved in a biking accident, I believe, on the 17th or 18th, and he's in critical condition. I want you guys to pray for, a speedy recovery. And, he's a well-known dude. I mean, he's worked with Peyton Manning, worked with Michael Vick, Matt Ryan, rather, Steve Young, and he's been tasked with developing the new Jets quarterback. Then I want to congratulate the Milwaukee Bucks. And I was actually in the air, so I didn't get to see Game 6 live on my internet here. Hopefully that doesn't continue to be a problem. Was looking forward to watching Game 6, but what a performance. 50 points, 14 rebounds, 5 blocks. He just would not be denied. And it was an
There you go.
Hey, Russ, how you doing, man?
I'm good. How are you? How you
good.
been?
Hey, listen, I apologize, man. You know how it is. The internet sometimes it does whatever the heck it wants to do.
That's exactly right. That's very unpredictable and so on, which kind of epitomizes any NFL season these days.
There you go. There you go. You know, I want to stay in. You know, you heard me. You know, I talked about Greg Knapp. I also talked about the Milwaukee Bucks. But I want to start today off, you know, talking about the Green Bay Packers and Aaron Rodgers. I want to stay right there in Wisconsin. I'm trying to figure all of this out, you know, because you get the organization reportedly offered him, you know, a 2-year extension, which would have kept him there for the next 5 years. So that basically says, hey, we're committed to you. You know, the whole Jordan Love thing, just push it aside. This is where we're headed. He turns it down. This saga is almost like, you know, as the world turns. I'm telling you, you listen to Aaron talk, and he says, hey, I love Jordan Love. He's a great kid. I love my coaches. I love my teammates. I love the fans. The one thing that I see that he forgot and left off was the organization. And to me, therein lies, you know, the issues and the problems, you know, with Aaron Rodgers right now. And I'm curious, what in the world could have happened, Russell, behind the scenes to cause Aaron Rodgers to be acting the way that he's acting?
Well, he apparently has a problem with the philosophy of how the Packers run their business. Okay. But here's the thing that kind of jumps out to me, and I have no, you know, dog in this fight or anything like that. And you know as well as I do, people have made the comparison of Brett Favre and then them drafting Aaron Rodgers in 2005 to be a successor. And then, of course, Aaron Rodgers and then Jordan Love drafted in the first round to be a successor. Correct me if I'm wrong, is I got the impression for a number of years, Brett kind of held the Packers, I don't want to say hostage, but he wavered so much. Am I going to play? Am I going to play? Am I going to play? And eventually, after 3 years of Aaron sitting, they decided to move on. I never heard Aaron Rodgers utter the word retirement.
Right.
Okay. And it's almost like he was offended that they decided to make this move up in the first round to get him. And I understand when he says, I love Jordan Love. That doesn't necessarily mean I love how we got him.
Right.
And what the plan here is. And this is a team that relies heavily on free agency. You know that as well as I do. It's not a team. Relies heavily on the draft. Right. I'm sorry, misspoke. Right. When they went out a couple of years ago and got Zadarius Smith and Preston Smith and Adrian Amos and Billy Turner in free agency and opened up the checkbook, that was like, wow, that's the Packers. They just don't do that. But if you rely on that philosophy, Seth, as you know, you have to draft well. And I don't know if they've necessarily drafted well the last 4 or 5 years. You know, Ted Thompson, you know, God rest his soul, is no longer with us and so on, replaced by Brian Gutekunst. I think Gutekunst made a big splash with that free agency move, but they really haven't done a lot since then. And I think there's just frustration there. And it's funny because I hear a lot of people talking about, well, you know, Aaron doesn't have any help. Well, he's got, you know, Aaron Jones, and he's got Devontae Adams, and he's got David Bakhtiari. But how much defensive help do the Packers have? Okay. I see them, Mike Pettinger there, unable to stop the run. My good friend Tom Jackson says this all the time. You're not a great defense if you can't stop the run. Absolutely. They're 13th in the league against the run this past season. Dalvin Cook ran wild against them at Lambeau Field. They blew a big lead at Indianapolis because they failed in the second half. So they've gotten better as terms of running the football themselves. But in terms of stopping the run, they're more of a pass rush, create plays defense. And eventually I think that's eventually going to get you in trouble. And I know people don't necessarily talk about the running game like we did 10 years ago. But if you don't think offensive balance is important, then you're not really paying attention.
Well, I mean, there is that, you know, that those talking heads out there now that puts all the onus on the fact that you got to throw the ball. You got to throw the ball early and often, then you got to come back in the second half when you got the game under control and run the football at that point. I just think that, the more the game changes, the more it stays the same.
Yes.
You look at Tom Brady and the Tampa Bay Buccaneers in the Super Bowl, they were balanced. I believe they ran the ball a couple more times than they actually threw it. And everyone will say, well, they got to lead early. Well, the reason why those pass plays worked is because they were running the ball effectively.
Right.
Both running backs, had pretty decent days. I think they had over 150 yards rushing, and Tom really only threw for about 200 yards, So, I just don't think that there's very many quarterbacks out there that succeed without a running game. Now, you talk about Aaron Rodgers and the Green Bay Packers. I believe that, when you look at them defensively, 2 years ago, they were one of the best defenses in the league. I think that the linebacker that they let go to the Giants, is it Martinez?
Blake Martinez left.
Blake Martinez. Yes. I mean, listen, he was a tackling machine. I thought that was a major mistake to let a guy like that walk out of your organization because, he's not a great playmaker, but what he does efficiently and effectively is what you lack the most right now. He's a great tackler and he makes a lot of tackles. That's what he does. I'm trying to understand this whole deal because, is Aaron just tired? Is he tired of having to carry the load? Does he look at a Tom Brady exit New England and be able to go down to Tampa Bay and have some say-so and how that team is shaped and how it looks? And maybe he wants a little bit of that power. I don't know what it is. But when you look at, I can say that, you look at a guy like Tom Brady and he goes in and he asks for Antonio Brown and Bruce Arians says, hell no. Right. And Tom is like, hey, listen, bring the guy in, Bruce, put it on me. I got him. I'll take care of him. I'll make sure that everything runs smooth, that there's no issues, and Bruce trusts him to do that. Bruce trusts him to make his own, to call his own game in game, and when you're looking at another elite quarterback in Aaron Rodgers, maybe he's looking at Tom Brady and saying, hey, I want some of that.
I think that's a great point. And getting Aaron Jones and helping, what's funny, Seth, is I think about a couple of Hall of Fame quarterbacks who for a long time in their career carried the team. Okay. John Elway. And then when did he become successful? When all of a sudden Mike Shanahan shows up and Terrell Davis is carrying the ball. Okay. You go to Peyton Manning. His last couple of years in Indianapolis, this is what it appeared to me. Throw the ball, get a big lead. The other team's going to quit running, so we'll just turn Freeney and Mathis loose. Mm-hmm. And eventually that doesn't work.
Right.
Okay. So then he surrounds himself with a more balanced offense in Denver. Ironically, doesn't have a great year. In fact, a career, probably one of the worst years of his career, arguably. The final year, he sits out the time, Brock Osweiler, and they wind up, and he was on his last legs in that Super Bowl. He was really done, nothing, and so on. And maybe Aaron, I don't know if Aaron's looking at that or looking at that Tom that deeply. Well, I like what you said about Brady because Brady understands. It's funny. Brady gets a lot of accolades and deservedly so. Mm-hmm. But he understands because he learned from Bill Belichick that this is a team game. Right. And if you surround yourself, I always go back to the first year the Patriots won the Super Bowl. I don't know if you know this. They played the Raiders in the snow, the Steelers in Pittsburgh, and then the Rams in the Super Bowl. Their offense in 3 games scored 3 touchdowns. One of those touchdowns, Seth, was via Drew Bledsoe because Brady got knocked out of the AFC title game in Pittsburgh. Mm-hmm. Their defense and special teams scored 3 touchdowns in those playoffs. So, but Tom Brady won the Super Bowl. And, I get all that and so on. Okay. And then, it's the Patriot, early on the Patriots dynasty, the early parts of the dynasty was more defensive football than it was offensive football. But Think about some of those great Patriots offenses that either lost in the Super Bowl or couldn't get to the Super Bowl. So Tom understands that, game manager kind of has like this dirty word attached to and so on. everybody's a game manager. You manage the game that is presented to you. And Tom Brady learned that after 20 years with Bill Belichick, because Bill Belichick's 6 champions were all different in a lot of ways. Okay. Some were offensive, some were more balanced. I mean, the year in 2004 when they had Corey Dillon and they really had a top-notch running game.
Mm-hmm.
And then latter, but think about, I mean, he lost. Tom Brady threw for 505 yards in the Super Bowl against the Eagles, and they lost.
Yeah.
He threw for about $140 in the Super Bowl against the Rams in 2001, and they won. What does that tell you about this game?
Well, it's situational.
Yes.
You know, and as a coaching staff, you've got to be able to adjust to the situation at hand. You know, I tell people all the time when we're talking about, the Patriots, they were a defensive team, the first couple of Super Bowls that they won. And they really were for a long time. And you kind of see them getting back to it this year with some of their free agent acquisitions. They were a multiple tight end set with Gronk and Hernandez. And they ran the ball and they created play action off the ability to run the ball. And that's how dominant they became. They really didn't transform themselves until the Indianapolis Colts forced their hand.
Yes.
When Peyton Manning began to spread everything out and started to complain about his receivers are being beat up and held at the line, they changed the rules. That you can only chuck the wide receiver one time in a 5-yard area. That made Josh McDaniels and Tom Brady and Bill Belichick change how they like to run offense, because they looked at the Indianapolis Colts and realized that those guys could score every possession and that they had to keep up possession for possession. And they weren't going to be able to do that in a multiple tight end set. Now you got Wes Walker and all of these slot guys and, these running backs that are multifaceted. They can not only run the ball, but can run screens and beat one-on-one out of the backfield, and you spread everybody out. And, that was a transformation. So when you talk about adapting, they, more than any other team, I think, in the last 20 years, have been able to adapt to the changes that have happened in the NFL.
Oh, I don't think there's any question about it. And that's why you have a run like they had. 19 straight winning seasons, which is the second longest in the history of the NFL. No team had won more than 7 straight division titles, and they won 11. Okay. I think in every which way. They just did it every which way. I mean, they were in the Super Bowl 4 times in 5 years. Okay. And I mean, I guess that's the trend now. I mean, the last 5 teams that go to the Super Bowl in the AFC, Seth, are only New England and Kansas City. And the last time we saw anybody other than them was Denver when Peyton Manning and that defense won the Super Bowl. So, the adaptive, I always just considered they were just so smart. Okay. Watching New England even work the clock, even when they were behind, even, sideline passes to kill a little clock, preserve. I'll date myself. It reminded me of the 2 quarterbacks in the 70s that you absolutely wanted the clock to say 0:00 because you knew what they could do. And that was Roger Staubach and Kenny Stabler. Okay. And when you played New England, you wanted to make damn sure that game was over before you could go, okay, because they just did it so many different times. They had the great kicking game, the great special teams. Bill Belichick, because of how well-versed he is in the entire game of football, okay, which he's been a coach in the league since the mid-'70s, knows there's so many different ways to, and you know that as well as anyone.
Right.
There's so many different ways to win a football game. You can have, 50 yards of total offense, but if your defense and special teams score 3 touchdowns, more than likely you've won a game. You can have 500 yards of total offense and fumble the ball 4 times, and that's that. So that's the beauty. To me, that's the beauty of football.
Well, I mean, listen, that's the, your ability to protect the football, to me, is everything. I think that's the greatest equalizer between your ability to protect the football and your ability to keep your quarterback from duress. Because I don't care, who the quarterback is. If he's under duress, he's not going to be all that you really need and want him to be. There are multiple ways of winning. But I think when you get down to the NFC and the AFC championship every single year, you've got the 4 best teams. You've got the 4 best coordinators on both sides of the ball. And more than likely, you probably got the 4 best special teams in the NFL. Okay. And everybody's trying to figure out a way to take away what you're best at, what you're strong at. And good coaches figure out and find ways, to diversify what they do. Sometimes you need to run the football. If a team is coming out, I can remember playing against the Kansas City Chiefs when they had Christian Okoye and Barry Ward. We hadn't given up a 100-yard rusher in like 15 games. So we roll into Kansas City. Dave Craig is the quarterback, okay, and we're geared up to stuff them all day long. They come out and they throw the ball the first 12 plays of the game. I mean, got us completely off balance. We look up, we're down 17-0 in the first half, because we had locked in on stopping the run, and Marty Schottenheimer was smart enough to say, you know what, hey, they're going to come in here and try to stuff us. They can with the players that they have, but we're going to play action passing, and we're going to play action passing to death. We're going to freeze their safeties. We're going to freeze their linebackers, and we're going to take advantage of throwing the ball when we get those linebackers stepping up. That's great adaptability, by coaches, So before we segue into my next topic, can the rift between the Green Bay Packers and Aaron Rodgers, can it be fixed, or is he done there, in your opinion?
I don't think it necessarily can be fixed, but you might be able to put a tourniquet on it for a little bit, okay? Depending on how long he wants to play and what they could get if they do decide to deal him, okay? I mean, he's not making it any easier on them. Depending on who you listen to, is he taking a shot at the organization this time? Is it that time? It was funny. I watched the match, and Tom Brady had more to say about it than Aaron Rodgers did. All those little jokes and so on. We're finding out that Tom Brady's pretty entertaining on social. He was pretty entertaining at the White House the other day too.
No doubt about it.
And so on. So, it seems like Aaron's keeping a lot inside because let's be honest, we really haven't heard from him. Damn as they may on that match, the TNT people tried to get something out of him when he was on the golf cart, and, he's not budging and so on. So training camp opens on the 27th. Okay. That's, 6 days away. Will he be there? Will he decide? I mean, listen, he is, I would say I've never seen a guy throw a football like Aaron Rodgers has. And I've watched a lot of quarterback, Dan Marino with that quick release, Warren Moon with the perfect spiral, but Aaron's like a little different. And I'm just going to do the regular season because it still boggles my mind, Seth, that this man has been in the league since 2005. He's been the starter since 2008. He's thrown over 400 touchdown passes, and he still hasn't thrown 100 picks.
Wow. That I did not know.
He has not thrown 100 regular season picks, and I think he's at 412. He's either 5th or 6th in NFL history. I mean, he throws the ball away. Now, if you watch Aaron Rodgers, he throws it away as much as anybody would. Okay. And by the way, I'm just going to jump back something you said about protecting the ball, if you don't mind. A lot of people get caught up in turnover differential in this league. They look, who's this, who's that? Go back and look, and you're spot on. Look at the teams that actually commit the fewest turnovers in the league. And the vast majority of the ones are the ones that wind up in the playoffs. Because here's what I know. I remember the Bears a number of years ago had 44 takeaways. That's a pretty impressive total.
Mm-hmm.
They had 24 turnovers. That's not an impressive total. So while it says plus 20, and you're like, doesn't necessarily work out that way. You look at these teams with and by the way, who had the fewest turnovers in the league last year? The Green Bay Packers.
Wow. Well, I just, just to put a bow on this, I think that, I think Aaron shows up. I think Aaron I believe that he needs one more Super Bowl to cement his legacy.
Mm-hmm.
That's just my opinion.
Right.
I could be 100% wrong. He's got one. I believe that he needs 2 to cement his legacy. And my whole issue with where he is and what's going on right now is the fact that what other opportunity could you possibly be traded to that's going to be better than the offensive situation that you presently have? Yeah, you might not have the defense, but that's fixable. At least Green Bay has tried, in free agency and the draft this year to cement the defense a little more and put them in a situation where they're not solely relying upon the offense. Mm-hmm. But from a talent standpoint, the guys that he's got, he's not going to go anywhere else to another organization and be in position to challenge for a Super Bowl immediately. His best opportunity to get that second one, in my opinion, is this year with the team that he's with the guys on the offensive side that he has.
Couldn't agree more. And think about it. He had a couple of years where he was a little banged up. He had those couple of years where I think him and Mike McCarthy might have gotten on each other's nerves after a while. Mike's not a great believer in the running game. We know that. We actually saw that in Dallas last year, where he didn't necessarily stress the run. I mean, a lot gets said about Ezekiel Elliott's health and the offensive line, but he's never been. But Matt LaFleur comes in, and it took him a little while. That first year, he put up okay numbers, but not 48 touchdowns and 5 picks numbers. So once he got acclimated, he looked like the Aaron Rodgers that we saw those 2 MVP seasons. And like I said, the thing about Aaron, too, that he can still get out of the pocket. He's still a threat to run the ball into the end zone. Mm-hmm. And, being a versatile quarterback and a mobile quarterback is very key. But even with all the wear and tear he's had, we saw that numerous times last year. I think that's the thing that always has made him one of the best ever, because he's not just a pure pocket passer.
Well, there's nothing more you can say about it. We got training camps that are opening. Yep. That's a great segue. Most teams, their rookies are coming in on the 22nd. The vets are coming in on the 27th, although there's a few teams that have already reported starting yesterday. Our beloved Eagles, both the vets and the rookies, report on the 27th. Give me your take. What's the few hot topics that you're most excited about looking at this year? There's so much going on. I mean, you got the young, you got the six quarterbacks drafted, or 8 quarterbacks drafted, early this year. You've got, Julio Jones moving, to Tennessee and giving them, this monster of, a wide receiving core with A.J. Brown. You've got Kansas City retooling their offensive line.
Oh, yeah.
There's just so much. There's so much to look at. You got Dak Prescott coming back. You got the Eagles with, a young quarterback and, an experienced offensive line, if they can stay healthy, that I believe will be a little bit better than anyone really projects them to be. There's so many storylines. You got John Gruden that everybody's up in arms about, that, hey, this guy's been there for 3 years and they haven't done anything. Right. He signed this 10-year contract. When are we going to get what we're looking for out of the Las Vegas Raiders? There's so many storylines to actually take a look at here, and we'll have plenty of time to do it over a 3-week preseason. But give me your take. What are you looking forward to most?
Well, I want to do first. I'll do an overview, Seth, and it's right in your wheelhouse. Will we see defense come back after last year? Okay, the offensive numbers that were put up in the league were unbelievable, considering there were no preseason games. So is this going to be a year of adjustment? And we saw teams that were traditionally good defensive teams. The Vikings really jump out to me. The Vikings went from giving up, I believe, 303 points to 475.
Wow.
Okay. And I know they made a lot of changes, and Rick Spielman brought in a lot of young players. They drafted 15 players. 9 of them were defensively, and they didn't have Daniel Hunter, and he's coming back this year, and so on. So as a big overview, Detroit gave up the second most points in the season in NFL history last year, Seth. Okay. We saw teams give up yards like Jacksonville, Houston, Detroit, Minnesota, Dallas. It was almost comical to watch it. And yet, what did we get in the Super Bowl? Because you can never figure this stuff out. We saw a team not score a touchdown in the Super Bowl, which goes back to the retooling of the offensive line. Eric Fisher and Mitchell Schwartz both missed that game, obviously. So, obviously, the young quarterbacks and how fast they are pushed into the starting lineup. You got Trevor Lawrence, obviously, down in Jacksonville. Trey Lance with the 3rd overall pick. What does that mean for Jimmy Garoppolo? Do the Niners rebound? I mean, it's been other than the Super Bowl year, it's been a rough 4 years for Kyle Shanahan. Mm-hmm. Be it injuries or whatever. I mean, last year in week 2, they lost Solomon Thomas and Nick Bosa to knee injuries and so on. So, I mean, they went from the Super Bowl to 6 wins. So, defense is something I'm certainly watching. I also want to see. Buffalo intrigues me because they went out and got Emmanuel Sanders, which is great to pair with Stephon Diggs. But I saw them play the Chiefs twice last year, and they got pushed around. They gave up over 400 yards in each game. They gave up 245 yards rushing to the Chiefs on a Monday night in their own building. And then they went into Kansas City in the AFC Championship game. So is Buffalo the team ready to push? And, champions until dethroned. There's only ever been one time where a wild card team won the Super Bowl and then repeated as Super Bowl champions. And those were the Broncos in 97 and 98. Okay. So Tampa's going to try and do something that's only been done once previously. But I'll throw one out, and I have a piece coming out later today. It might even be out. Here's one for you, Seth. You think about Super Bowl history. We have never had a Super Bowl where the last 2 teams to win the Super Bowl played each other in the Super Bowl.
So you're talking about a rematch this year?
Well, a rematch, yeah, it would be a rematch because Kansas City won 54. But think about all the great teams in the 70s and 80s and so on and how we've never seen the last two defending Super Bowl champions then play in the Super Bowl, which, boy, talk about a round robin. Could you imagine if that happened? And it would be like the 3rd time in 2 years that the Chiefs and the Buccaneers were playing each. I remember they played in the regular season last year. They played in the Super Bowl. Could they play in the Super Bowl again? So I'm big on the – and I'll throw out one more. Is there going to be a team in either conference, Seth, that wins 10 games like the Dolphins did last year and not make the playoffs?
Wow. Well, I've been there and done that before. So
yeah. Yeah, I guess you have.
I have no sympathy for them.
No. Well, listen, as you know, we were via Twitter revisiting your great 91 game. That was as much fun as I've ever had watching a team play defense that year with you guys. And that was, correct me if I'm wrong, that was Bud Carson.
Yeah.
Who was your coordinator, who obviously cut his teeth with the Steelers as well. And you want to talk about an assistant coach that maybe garners a little Hall of Fame consideration. Bud Carson would not be a bad guy to put in. U91, you guys you're still, I believe, the last team to lead the league in total defense, run defense, and pass defense all in the same season.
Yeah, you know what? It was a great time to reminisce on. But to your point, your earlier point, you asked, will defenses make a resurgence? I believe that we've moved into an era where organizations really don't care that much about defense. They know that I agree with
that. It's evident in the way they draft. It's evident in the way they spend their money.
Yeah, I just think that you've taken the crucial elements of the game of football out of the defense's hands. And I'm all for protecting the players, but we know what we sign up for at the end of the day. There's a sacrifice that we make to do what we do. And when I watch players, making 10, 15, 17, $18 million a year, and they don't give the effort to make a tackle, they don't give the effort to make a play, that's bothersome for a guy that came, from my era, where if you didn't give the effort, then you didn't get on the field, but that just seems to be the mode of operation now. They don't practice. I mean, I went to 2 years ago, I went to the Ravens Eagles joint practice, and I almost threw up on my shoes watching them practice. I'm like, they don't do anything. Why are they out here? They don't do anything. nobody touches anybody. Before they even get close, the coaches are blowing whistles all over the place. The only contact was the offensive line and defensive line pass rush drill, and they literally got 3 seconds, so you never really knew who dominated and who lost. They don't do anything.
No.
And you wonder why the defense is so lackluster. Now, when I look at defense, and you talk about them not having, OTAs and a minimized training camp with no preseason games, it'll be a lot like, this year with these new organizations. I think the Philadelphia Eagles, in my opinion, are going to be a lot better than people think. I'm being redundant, but I'm doing it for a reason.
Right.
But I think that the offense is going to be leaps and bounds ahead of the defense, because I think that's just the way it works. The offense always is a little bit ahead of the defense, because they know the snap count, they know where they're going, they know what they're trying to accomplish. On the defensive side of the ball, we're reading and reacting to everything that we see. So when you have young guys, and the Philadelphia Eagles are going to have a couple of new young guys, a couple of new pieces that learn a whole new defense, it's going to take them a little longer, especially on the back end, because the communication piece is so important. It's going to take them a little longer. I think that's one of the things that you see that plagues a lot of, that plagued defenses last year, is that they could never seem to catch up with offenses that knew exactly where they were going and what they wanted to do, and they had no answer for it, because they hadn't seen enough of and practiced enough of, what they were going to be doing, with Zoom meetings and minimized time on the field. I mean, football is a game of doing. If you're not tackling, if you're not shedding blocks, if you're not hitting, if you're not doing all these things on a regular basis, you can't just turn it on Sunday and expect for things to just be the way that you expect for them to be. The game doesn't work that way, So I think that the NFL has really minimized defenses to a point where there are very, very few teams that feel like they can be competitively defensively.
Well,
what they're trying to do is they're just trying to hang in,
right,
get a turnover here or there, trying to keep the score lower, keep the score low, so that they can figure out a way to get the offense back the ball. But you look at a team like Tampa Bay, that defense is dominant. That game plan was masterful. You can talk about Patrick Mahomes being limpy. You can talk about the 2 offensive tackles being out of the game. But that game plan was masterful, because they took away the weapons that no one else in the NFL could take away. And to me, they created a blueprint. Now, you need to have the pieces to be able to do it, but I think that they created a blueprint. And it's not, and I thought Tampa Bay, once they got to the Super Bowl, I felt like they were a year ahead of schedule. Right. You know how freaking dangerous they're going to be this year?
Yes. All their starters are back in the Super Bowl. Yeah.
And Kansas City licking his wounds, and chomping at the bit. I think you see those 2 teams right back in the mix again, barring any kind of major injuries.
No, it's so interesting to hear you talk about physical football, because the NFL has to emphasize that you don't have the contact you used to have in training camp. I think that's why offensive lines struggle a lot more to get into a groove early in the season, because they're not really hitting anybody. It's all physicality. And I like what you said about the Eagles, because go back to the Super Bowl, which was not that long ago. That offensive line, especially in the Super Bowl, was dominant. That's really what won the game. That's enabled Nick Foles to do what he could do. And a lot of people talk about Nick Foles and the Philly special and all the yards he threw for. The thing that always stood out to me about that game, Seth, was that the Eagles put a $164 on the ground against Bill Belichick's defense with Blunt and Jay Ajayi and Corey Clement. Okay. They physically, that had to really frustrate Bill Belichick to see his run defense give up 164. It's a stat you don't hear a lot, because it's all Nick Foles and the cleverness and the big play. And it's a magnificent Super Bowl, don't get me wrong, and so on. But that physical type of football is kind of been diminished for various reasons and so on. So now the one beauty, I will say this, the one beauty of a 17-game season, you're going to get an extra week to hone your skills. But I'll be really curious. I mean, I'll be at the Hall of Fame game in 2 weeks. Pittsburgh and Dallas opened training camp today because they're in the Hall of Fame game and so on. So I'll be curious. And there's two teams. Talk about offensive line. The Steelers is completely revamped. And Dallas is looking to bounce back from a very shaky year where a lot of their guys were hurt. But I go back to the Eagles. I don't want to forget my thought. The Eagles' problem was on the offensive line last year were not execution. It was health. When you lose Andre Dillard and Brandon Brooks before the training camp even begins, you're in for a long year. And Lane Johnson, and Kelsey, I believe, was the only guy to start all 16 games. Okay? Line is continuity. You know that. If your guys are in and out of the lineup, what are you expected to do? Carson Wentz still has issues protecting the football, but they gave up 65 sacks this past year. Okay? Yeah. So having those guys healthy and knowing what they can do because they've done it before will be the catalyst for them to escape the basement. In a division, think about it, in a division that no teams won 10 games each of the last 2 years.
Listen, you're 100% correct, and that's why I'm a little more on the optimistic side, because when I look at both sides of the ball, you got Lane Johnson, you got Brandon Brooks coming back off of 2 years of injury, you got Jason Kelsey. So from the center right, you got all pros across the board.
Right. On
the left side, I think that Isaac Seumalo was a guy that was drafted to be the heir apparent to Jason Kelsey when he called it a career, but he's entrenched himself over at left guard because he was a draft pick, not necessarily because he's the best player forward, in my opinion. Right. That's my opinion, but because he was a draft pick and he's a guy that's in their future plans. The Landon Dickerson pick, I liked. A lot of people didn't like it because of the injury.
Right.
I like it because, this year, what it allows them to do, if they'll be smart about it, is that it allows Landon Dickerson to slide in a competition role over behind Isaac Seumalo to push. Isaac Seumalo's contract is about to be up. They're going to have to pay him some significant dollars. So you got to kind of figure out, is that guy really a starter? Is he really, the next guy to play center, or is Landon Dickerson the center? You're going to leave him at guard. And then the most intriguing competition, in my opinion, is Jordan Mailata and Andre Dillard. Now, as well as I do, there's not an organization in the world that wants to see their number one draft pick, their first-round draft pick, beat out by a seventh-round, 4-year project. But to be honest with you, you want to know who the better player is right now? It's Jordan Mailata. So are they gonna have the wherewithal to allow those two competitions to play out the way that they need to play out, and for the best player to man those positions? If they do, then they're going to have a solid offensive line. Now, they got to stay healthy. But then you flip over to the other side of the ball, and you've got great defensive line play. You drafted two great defensive guys. I think the Milton Williams pick, he looks to me like a guy that could play inside or outside. You got Hargrave coming back as a starter. The kid out of USC, I can't pronounce his name, so I'm not even going to mess it up. That they drafted, the defensive tackle out of USC. I love what I see out of him on film. He lives in the backfield, commands a double team. Not very fleet of foot, but big and powerful. At the defensive end positions, you bring in Kerrigan, to be your third guy, and you got Barnett under a contract year, so he's got to play like his hair's on fire. You know what you're going to get out of Brandon Graham. If you can't dominate the line of scrimmage on both sides of the ball, then it's very unlikely that you're going to win very many football games. Now, if the Eagles can stay healthy in those two areas, and the young guys at the skill positions can grow up quick, then I think they can make some noise in the NFC East. That's just my opinion. I'm looking at Dallas. Yeah, they've got the most potent offense, in the NFC East when you look at all the weapons that they have. But Jerry always finds a way to mess it up. He always finds a way to say something or do something to create pressure on his players that puts them in a bad situation. It's like, I'm watching, the Dallas press conference today. Why is it that Jerry Jones is always in these press conferences? No other owner in the NFL, no other owner in the NFL is sitting there with his coach at the opening of training camp.
Well, It's so funny you say that because, all the years that Jason Garrett was there, you would have sworn that we used to kid. I mean, head coach Jerry Jones, because he really always wanted to be the head coach. And I've never seen an owner consistently speak for his team rather than the head coach. So you're right. But the other thing about the NFC East is, if you think about it, all four teams are somewhat heavy on one side of the ball and somewhat deficient on the other.
Right.
Washington has the makings of one of those scary type defenses. Okay. They kind of did what the Rams did about 10 years ago and drafted all guys in the first round to do defensive line. Okay. The 49ers did it recently, with DeForest Buckner and Nick Bosa and Solomon Thomas and Eric Armstead. Now a bunch of those guys are gone and so on. But quarterback wise, is it going to be Ryan Fitzpatrick? He went through 4 different quarterbacks, including the playoffs last year. The Giants, to me, are intriguing. He brought in a lot of offensive people, and I think that their defense really came on last year. Their back end with Peppers, who has emerged kind of as a leader, Jabril Peppers. Logan Ryan was a great pickup because he can do anything. James Bradbury, very underrated corner that Gettleman knew from Carolina. And then Dallas, you mentioned Dallas. Yeah, they got the 3 wide receivers, blah, blah. But they used 8 of their 11 picks on the defensive side of the ball. They have a new defensive coordinator in Dan Quinn. They have a rookie linebacker who apparently they like in Micah Parsons. They brought in Keanu Neal, the safety, to play weak side linebacker. Okay. And yet they have Jalen Richardson and Van Der Esch and so on. So watching them play defense, that game against the Browns where they gave up over 300 yards rushing last year. So they're a classic example of a team very much like Minnesota. Minnesota last year scored over 400 points and gave up almost 500 points. So who is the complete team? And you brought up the trenches with the Eagles. Go back to the Super Bowl. I talked about the offensive line. I shouldn't skirt the defensive line. The depth of that defensive line when Jim Schwartz was there enabled them to sack Tom Brady in the fourth quarter. They had no sacks leading up into that. But because they were deep and they could rotate people, that's where it is. That's in the trenches. And as far as if you combine offense and the defensive personnel in the NFC East, in the trenches, the Eagles, I think, are clearly the best. Okay, we don't know about the Washington's offensive line. We like their defensive line. We don't know about the Giants' offensive line. Nate Solder's been a big disappointment for them at left tackle. Okay, they went out and got another tackle last year. Okay, Dallas, their offensive line is probably more reputation than it used to be. Right. And defensively, we're not sure what they are defensively last year. I like your point about Jerry, though. He somehow will get involved. Okay, I'm sure we'll hear from him when they play the Bucks on week 1 on Thursday Night Football in the opener.
I mean, it's just amazing because it wears on not only the coaching staff, but it wears on the organization. I mean, Jason Garrett's last year, they get to the end of the year and the whole division is up for grabs, and they are in position to challenge. And Jerry comes out in the post-game interview outside the locker room and starts to talk about, job security and, players for next year. And it just, to me, you created a pressure on the coaching staff, but the players are watching this.
Sure.
And you create pressure on them because that's their coach. And what they want to do is they want to go out and play for their coach. They want to win for their coach. So everything that they're doing is in a pressurized situation. It's not a natural thing because, they're going into the game. They know they got to compete. They know they want to win. But in the recesses of their mind, they're thinking about the long-term effect of their head coach. So now you fast forward, you bring in Mike McCarthy. You pay Ezekiel Elliott all this money, and then you minimize his workload. Which made no sense to me. Okay. So now what's going to happen between Mike McCarthy and Jerry Jones? Because Mike McCarthy likes to run the offense the way he likes to run it. That's why him and Aaron Rodgers fell out. Okay. Right. Then you got Jerry Jones that's over here. I mean, sooner or later, he's got to say, my goodness, I just paid this running back all this money. He's one of the premier backs in the game, and we're not giving him the ball enough. We're not featuring him, out of the backfield enough. And now that you got Pollard and you see what he can do, obviously that's going to take some touches away from Ezekiel Elliott because of his versatility. But Jerry just finds a way. And to your point, when I look at the entire NFC East, there's a but with every single team.
Yes.
I start with the Cowboys. They're ultimately talented on the offensive side of the ball. You've seen the pace that Dak Prescott was on last year before he broke his ankle. My goodness. I mean, he was about to shatter all kinds of records last year if he stays healthy. But the question mark is the defense. I'm not so sure that Dan Quinn's the guy because, I've seen this picture before. He had elite level players in Seattle that could run that cover 3 shell, that they can get away with some things. They had dominant linebackers, that could control the middle of the field. He went to Atlanta. They never, ever seemed to be able to get that defense to look like the Seattle Seahawks defense. And believe me, they tried. They tried a myriad of times to do it, but they were always pushed around. They were always an undersized defense. So now you come to Dallas with much pressure on you. You're the new defense coordinator. 8 out of your 11 draft picks, are defensive players. And you've got probably the premier defensive player, in Micah Parsons, in my opinion, and now you got to figure out what you're going to do with these 3 linebackers and how that's going to work and how to get all the other pieces working and get these guys to play the right way. I'm just not so sure that cover 3 scheme is a scheme that's really going to work in a division, in my opinion, that's going to be wide receiver rich. I think the Eagles wide receivers are going to be much better than they've been. The Washington football team's wide receivers have been off, and you can get Fitzmagic, you can get Fitztragic. It just all depends on how he's flowing, but he's got enough weapons there to cause you some problems. The biggest question mark with the New York Giants is Daniel Jones.
Right.
It's not the talent that's around him, in my opinion. Will he ever elevate to what Gettleman thought he could be when he moved up and everybody scratched their head at the draft pick? He's shown signs of, taking the next step, but he's also left a lot of New York Giants fans scratching their heads. And I think when you look at all those ifs, ands, and buts, that pretty much leaves the Philadelphia Eagles in a pretty good spot, to be the team with the easiest record in the league and to be the team that no one's expecting anything of. Come on, shock them.
Well, you brought up Daniel Jones, and his inability to field a rush is troublesome. Okay. I obviously, when you do what I do and so on, and you do quarterback stuff, everybody looks at touchdowns and interceptions. Mm-hmm. I looked at fumbles. Fumbles is a big thing to me. Okay. I looked at the fact that Kirk Cousins over the last 3 years has fumbled the ball 28 times. Hasn't lost all of them. Right. Hasn't lost. In fact, I think 5 or 6 years in a row, Seth, he's had at least 9 fumbles a year. You don't lose all of them, okay? But if you're getting hit, you got to learn how to protect that ball. Carson Wentz, had his issues with that as well, not protecting the ball. And again, it's not just throwing the picks. It's just dropping the ball and putting it on. Of course, we saw Daniel Jones drop his whole body in the middle of a run last year, and he just fell on the ground. So that lack of so on. And I'll go back to Dan Quinn. The one thing he never able to fix, albeit Vic Beasley had a respectable second year and led the league in sacks and forced fumbles, he never found a pass rush in Atlanta. And in this division, with some of the way these kids can run around, Fitzpatrick's more, but he can be a little mobile. Obviously Jalen Hurts, Daniel, whatever. Where's the pass rush going to come from Dallas? Is it just going to be DeMarcus Lawrence? Are they going to blitz their linebackers? Because he never really solved that in the 5+ years he was in Atlanta, finding a consistent way to pressure the quarterback.
Good point. Great point. I'm going to throw one of my viewers' questions up here, for us to dive into, because, the Philadelphia Eagles secondary wise, I think they made a lot of good moves at the safety position. Mm-hmm. I think Darius Slay, you take away the game against DK Metcalf and Devontae Adams. And I thought he had a pretty solid year. But all the Eagles fans are wondering, what's going to happen on the other side. And Andy Lugo wants to know, he says, cornerback is my biggest worry on the Eagles. Your opinion on the cornerbacks for the Eagles. You know, I've got a list of guys that are here that are available. You know, there's a lot of really, really good players that are still available on the free agent market. I was just going through the list today, and I was shocked at some of the names that are on there. Ultimately, some of those guys are going to wind up on rosters, but, you know, at cornerback, you know, you got Richard Sherman's got to get through, you know, whatever his issues are off the field. Darius Slay has championed the cause of Steven Nelson.
Right.
You know,
and that's the name you hear out there the most right now in terms of any team. Will he go to Philadelphia? Will he actually re-sign with Pittsburgh? You know, he's a guy who had 2 pretty good years with the Steelers, off a pretty good year with the Chiefs and so on. He's kind of the hot name out there as well. And not to interrupt you, I apologize, but we are getting around that time of the year where there's almost this new mini version of free agency floating around there as we get closer to camps. I mean, we saw the Steelers add Melvin Ingram. We saw the Chiefs re-sign Alex Okafor, which has a lot, obviously, to do with what's going on with Frank Clark. There are a lot of Jarrell Casey's out there. Kawan Short is out there. Geno Atkins is out there. There's a lot of good players that are still out there, and I find it hard to believe they're not going to wind up on a roster within the next 2 weeks.
Well, I agree. I think some of it will come on the heels of, you know, injury, but I think, you know, teams will get in, and after 2 weeks or a week of training, they'll realize that, hey, you know, we're weak in this position, and we have a guy out there. The only problem is, you know, salary cap wise, you know, because I've been tracking, you know, Xavier Howard, he's unhappy down in Miami, and you got Stephon Gilmore, who's unhappy, you know, in New England. Those guys obviously would have to be moved via trade. The other 2 guys, you know, they're looking for, you know, a comparable payday, you know, for what they bring to the table. And I know the Eagles aren't that far under the salary cap, and it's one of those situations where, you know, to me, the linchpin will be the linchpin will be Zach Ertz. You know, if they can move Zach Ertz's, you know, salary off the books, then that opens up the money that's necessary for you to go out and bring in one of these top flight cornerbacks. Right. I just still think, you know, when you're talking about having 2 cornerbacks on your team that's making $14 to $17 million on both sides, that's just a lot of money to have wrapped up at those 2 positions. So it's just going to be interesting to see, because I know that that's one of the positions that a lot of people are, a lot of Eagles fans are worried about, and a lot of my fans want to know, a lot of the Eagles fans wants to know what the heck is going on with Zach Ertz. You know, as we close the show, I want to give you the floor on those 2, because I'm of the opinion you got him under contract, make him come back and play. Okay, he has no value right now because he has such an off year last year. So why would you give him away for nothing or little to nothing? You know, he's not going to sit out. He's going to come in and play. And, you know, your 12 personnel is going to be even that much better that you have him in the fold, unless he doesn't want to be there or the coaching staff doesn't want to be there. Your thoughts on those last 2? Well,
first off, you got a young quarterback in Jalen Hurts. Second off, who's a better friend to the young quarterback or any quarterback than the tight end? You know, unless you got Larry Centers coming out of the backfield and scooping up, or LaDainian Tomlinson and so on. That safety valve. You know, having Travis Kelce for Patrick Mahomes was allowed him to develop, because he didn't just have to throw the ball deep, even though, you know, we know he can throw the ball about 75 yards in the air and so on. Having a safety valve like that, you know, I don't know if this is exactly what you're looking for, Seth, but this is such an intriguing year. You mentioned the salary cap. This is such an intriguing year financially for a lot of players, including all those franchise players who did not take long-term deals. Okay. I mean, Taylor Moton from the Panthers, the right tackle, he could wind up getting a big deal and so on. But you also know that next year the salary cap is up like $32 million.
Yeah.
Okay. I think a lot of these players are holding out for that in some regards and so on. Some are getting a little anxious. They want to get deals redone and so on. Go back to the cornerback spot with the Eagles. Let's be honest. Even the year they won the Super Bowl, their cornerback play was not necessarily. It was about the pass rush.
Right.
Okay. You don't give up 505 yards passing to Tom Brady in the Super Bowl and have necessarily great cornerback play.
Yeah, Jim Schwartz didn't want to hear any of that, though.
Oh, okay. All right. Well, his depth of the defensive line bailed him out and so on. But pass defense has been kind of an issue for them for the last 3 or 4 years. Let's be honest. Pass defense is kind of an issue for just about everybody in this league. I mean, there's no more Legion of Doom. There's no more what was Denver's secondary, the no-fly zone and so on. Probably, it's funny, probably the closest team right now, and now that the Rams don't have Troy Hill and John Johnson III anymore, the Giants could push for maybe having the best secondary in the league right now with Peppers and Ryan and Bradbury and so on. They remind me of Seattle because they're more back end than they are front end. But quarterback an issue. I don't see Zach Ertz necessarily going anywhere unless we get down to a couple days before the season and they get a deal and an injury opens up or somebody who's willing to take him on and so on, because he obviously had an off year, but he obviously can also help an awful lot of teams, probably a team, a young team. How about the Jaguars? Okay. Who you have a rookie quarterback and you get the feeling Trevor Lawrence is going to throw a lot of passes to Travis Etienne and also hand them the ball as well. Remember, they were working out Etienne at wide receiver, I think. And so on. So get him acclimated, get him these young guys who have to cut their teeth. And as you know, in this league right now, you don't get 5 or 6 years anymore. If you're a young quarterback, you maybe get 2 or 3. And thank goodness for Josh Allen. He blossomed in year 3 this past year.
Well, it's going to be interesting, man. I normally hate this time in between where the NBA finals ends and training camps open. But for some reason or another, it's gotten closer this year because of, I guess, COVID and how the season was pushed back. So we're only going to get a couple of days break in between. I'm excited, really excited for the season to get started. Really want to see what these Philadelphia Eagles are going to be, what they look like offensively, what type of defense they're going to run, special team scheme. And I'm really interested to watch some of these new teams and see not necessarily new teams, but new coaching staffs to take over these new organizations and what they do, what they have. And then some of these teams that are on the fence right now, whether it's coaching and whether it's players that are on the team, how they evolve and change where they are to put themselves, in a better position to be more and more competitive. But then again, I always, I agree with you wholeheartedly. If Kansas City and Tampa Bay aren't right back in the Super Bowl next year, something's greatly wrong because they are the cream of the crop in the NFL.
I don't think there's any question about it. By the way, I got to throw out one last thing before you let me go. When I was first starting to try to become a writer and so on, and then I eventually wound up in television and all that stuff, yada, yada, yada. I was able to go to Westchester in 1986, and I attended Buddy Ryan's first training camp with the Philadelphia Eagles. I sat and I was working for just a young magazine. I sat down with Wes Hopkins and did an interview with him, talking about a physical football player. I don't have to tell you yet. But correct me if I'm wrong. That would have been your rookie training camp.
That was my rookie. That was my rookie.
Clyde Simmons was also a rookie and so on. And I just remember standing around hearing Coach Buddy Ryan talk and the incredulous questions he was getting from the Philadelphia media because he was running the Oklahoma drill on day one.
Yeah.
Before, can you imagine that today, Seth?
No. I mean, listen. Before they were stretching and warming up and everything,
right?
The Oklahoma drill was the first drill of the first practice in training camp, and everybody's looking at each other. I mean, it kind of set the tone because you just knew, what type of deal it was going to be like. Right. And I'm telling you, by the time training camp was over, it was like a mass unit around there. I mean, there was never any doubt why we always started off 2-4, 1-4, 2-3. We always started off because Buddy he would beat us up in training camp. But man, once we got our legs back under us, it was a whole different deal. But yeah, I remember that. That was my rookie year. I
remember a writer saying to Buddy, "Aren't you afraid these guys are going to get hurt?" I think Buddy said something like, "Well, you're afraid you're going to get hurt. You shouldn't be playing football."
Pretty much. That sounds.
And I think I also remember him lauding Ron Heller. He had a lot of good things to say about Ron Heller, just his tenacity and all that stuff. It was literally, I stood around like 20 guys, and they're all seasoned reporters. I'm just there doing the Wes Hopkins interview, and they are stunned at what Buddy is telling them because they haven't seen anything like this in terms of the physicality of the very first day of a training camp.
Well, listen, if you're going to change a culture, then you got to come in and you got to change a culture. The message was sent, come to practice, bring a lunch pail. This is how it's going to be. If you don't want to do it, then we'll get you out of here and we'll find somebody that does. Yep. And I'm looking for guys that fight. He loved Heller because Heller would fight you tooth and nail. He didn't care who you were. He would fight you tooth and nail. And he wanted 53 guys with that kind of mindset, So, he had to change a culture that was, preeminent in Philadelphia for a long time. In between the Dick Vermeil days and the Marion Campbell days, the Eagles were in the basement of the NFC East with the Arizona Cardinals for something like, 7-8 years. Right. So, there was no way in the world that he was going to change the culture without doing things the way that he did it, and the media was shocked because they had never seen it before, but they forgot that you want to know something? Dick Vermeil ran his first training camps like that as well. Right. They had 3 a days under Dick.
Yeah, well, I got a chance to interview Coach Vermeil a long time ago as well, and so on. A passionate man and so on. So absolutely. A lot of good memories from down the, I grew up I was born in Philadelphia. Most of my family lives in the Poconos. So once a summer, I would go to Jets camp, Washington camp, Steelers camp, and Eagles camp. Just a different camp every weekend. So,
wow. Well, Russ, thank you, man. I appreciate your time. I tell my guests every single week, our most valuable commodity is our time. And I thank you for giving me the last 68 minutes and 30 seconds of your time to talk some football. I would love to have you come back on again. From the comments that I'm seeing, on my right-hand side here, my viewers, love the show today. So thank you.
Deal. I'll see you in Canton.
Will do, my friend. All right. Well, guys, that's it for the show today. As always, be good to each other and take care of each other. But most importantly, make sure that you love each other. I will see you guys right back here next week. Thanks for watching. Peace.